What up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Ask Paul. My name is Paul Abernathy, your host for this journey, and welcome to another episode where we're going to answer electrical questions, whether it's code related or just electrical in general. Thanks for joining me. Again, you can listen to all of our podcasts as well as watch other videos or interesting topics from our broadcast network over on Electrician Live. That's electricianlive.com. That is our Electrician Live broadcast network, and there you can watch our Electrify shows. You can listen to our Master the NEC videos and podcasts. You can listen to our Ask Paul segments there. But of course, if you want to send a question for me to answer, then you got to go to paulabernathy.com. It's paulabernathy.com and submit your question there on the portal. I will get it and answer it either via email or, if selected, on a upcoming podcast, much like today's. So today's podcast, and I should say all of this is also sponsored by Electrical Code Academy Incorporated. We are the creators of the Fast Tracks NEC learning system. So if you really want to learn the National Electrical Code, take your game to the next level, check us out over on electricalcodeacademy.net.com or .org. It really doesn't matter. Or you can go to masterthenec.com. And if you really want to get more information on our Fast Tracks program, choose those URLs and you can get more information. Also, we're sponsored in today's show specifically from electricianpride.com. That's electricianpride.com. That is where you can get all your neat swag. That's your master electrician, journeyman electrician, electrician in general, from the Code Strong to the gods of code to the just. There's so many things over there, from shirts to hats to sweatshirts to underwear. Believe it or not, tons of stuff over there. Do us a favor. Check out electricianpride.com and get some swag today. All right, today's episode comes to us from a gentleman who says, "Dear Paul, when you were heavily in the trade," well, yeah, when I was heavily in the trade, not so much anymore. When you were heavily involved in the trade, what did you use to bore underneath sidewalks? Thanks in advance. Okay, so back in the day, there's a couple methods that used, and again, we can broaden this topic up a little greater than this, talking about getting under driveways as well, because that was a concern in many cases if I'm running post lights or lights to driveways, into driveways, or maybe even the landscape lighting, because we did landscape lighting, and of course, I owned a company that put in underground pet fencing, so again, we had to get across driveways and things like that, and there was different ways to do it. Some of the driveways might have an expansion joint that we could just simply cut it a little deeper with a circular saw with a masonry blade in it, and we just cut a little deeper, lay the wire in the trench, to backfill it with silicone, and we were good to go. And then there's other methods where we're like, no, we need to bore underneath it, especially if we're running electrical or landscape lighting under sidewalks and things like that. So I have some techniques that I would use, and since you ask, I'll share them with you today. And I'll share a product with you that we invested in the last couple of years of our company and sold it since I moved to Texas. But it really made life a lot easier getting under sidewalks and in reasonable driveways. Never did anything really longer than a 2-car garage type length driveway, maybe 20 feet wide. But there's a kit that can make life a little simpler for you, and it is affordable. That's the big thing. It's affordable. But let's talk about old school and what we would do early on. Okay, so I'm probably sure that you've all heard of a term, hydraulic boring, and they make expensive equipment that can do boring, and it's quite expensive. And again, depending on how much of the boring you do, whether or not you want to invest in that. Most electricians will never invest in something like that. Also, I find that most of the time, if it was commercial, then that was totally different, and that was, big commercial boring equipment, and then we'd rent it, and that wasn't a big concern for most electricians. And I don't believe it's a concern for this question here, because he talks about sidewalks. Residential. So residential or even sidewalks and commercial, if it's just a sidewalk, these are typically framed up gravel and then concrete poured. So you can get down underneath the concrete slab. You can get down into the gravel bed, or depending on your installation and what you're running, again, following the National Electrical Code 300.5. The depth that you need to be can change as you go onto the slab if you go look at that table. But in the area that's running through the ground, okay, then that would be at a certain depth of cover to the top of a raceway. Unless, of course, you're doing direct burial cable, then it would be to the top of the direct burial cables and things like that. So anyway, what I would encounter was sidewalks. More often than not, more than driveways, was sidewalks. And how I got underneath them. Now, there's a couple ways. One sloppy way and one fairly easy way. If it's only like a 3-foot wide walkway and I had ground on each side, it was a little easier. So we'll talk about it from what I used to do from the old school to, you know, when I wised up and got a little bit of a system, which, to be honest with you, is less expensive now than it was when I originally had one. So that's kind of crazy that the price actually looks like it went down, if I remember right. Anyway, I'll talk about that in a minute, so stay tuned to make sure you listen to find what system I recommend later on here in the podcast. All right, so let's talk about old school Paul. Back as a contractor back in Virginia. When I wasn't lucky enough to be able to get there before the sidewalks or before something was being added and put my raceways in or something like that, when I would come in or we get a landscaping job where we were doing the landscape lighting as part of our company, sometimes the sidewalks are already in. And so we had to be creative in how we got underneath them. Usually there's a house, then there's a flower bed, then there's a sidewalk. So we have a little bit of earth on either side. Now, with the landscape lighting, it doesn't have to go very deep, okay? Because, again, we always did the 12-volt, low-voltage stuff. I didn't really get into it, believe it or not, the 120-volt stuff. Even then, it was low-voltage, transformer, those type of things. It's just much easier to work with. And now, the versatility of all the different lighting options, uplighting and all this kind of stuff, the 12-volt or 15-volt, they're just the way to go, right? So anyway, back in the day, when I had to get under the sidewalks, I would actually do a technique whereas I would take a EMT tubing and I would take it. Now, if it was a 3-foot driveway I keep saying driveway. If it was a 3-foot sidewalk, then I would dig out on the side that I was going to be starting from, that I'm going to be, driving my EMT underneath the sidewalk. From that side, if I'm going to do a 3-foot sidewalk, then I would have a 4-foot piece of EMT. Okay, and one end of the EMT I would crush with the sledgehammer so that it's kind of a flat, like a chisel, if you will. All right, and then on the other side, that's the part that I'm going to be banging with the sledgehammer. And of course, I'm going to cut these ends off with a reciprocating saw after I'm done anyway, so it's no big deal. So what I would do is on the side that I would start, I should say the side that I'm going to do my pounding from, if you will, I would dig a trench at least about 3 inches wider than the sledgehammer's head. And the depth that I would dig it, one would have to correspond to whatever I was running through the yard and whatnot. So depth of cover, 300.5, depending on what I'm doing. If it's landscape lighting, this obviously didn't have to be that deep. But whatever it was, I was making sure that I dug down, starting on the side of the sidewalk, down deep enough to get below the actual pour and down into the gravel substrate of that sidewalk. Hopefully they had one. And down just below that, so that earth underneath it is a little more movable because it's the gravel, allows for drainage and also underneath it. So what I would do is I would get down and I would dig my trench, again, a couple inches wider than the sledgehammer. And I would go, the distance I would go would be at least about 2 feet more than whatever the length of the actual EMT I'm using. So I would dig a trench back about 6 feet. And I would always lay a tarp beside my trench so that when I pulled my dirt out, I throw it onto the tarp so I don't get it all over the ground and I lose the dirt because, again, I'm going to be putting this back over it after I'm all done. So I would always just lay the tarp there and I'm shoveling everything with a trench shovel, a narrow shovel for trenches. And I'm cleaning it out and I'm putting it on the tarp right beside where I'm working, okay, keeping it clean, all right? Now, and of course, cutting it in a way that I still have the grass on the top to put back in place. I'm sure you're all familiar with that, right? So anyway, putting that to the side, cleaning out my trench. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because I want my EMT, my 4-foot EMT, to sit down in the trench, and I want to make sure that I can keep it horizontal to the actual sidewalk so that I'm driving it through as flat as possible to the other side. Now, on the other side of the sidewalk, I would clean out about a foot back from the sidewalk, and I would clean about a foot left and right. So it's kind of like a 1 foot square. Okay. It just gives me enough area to move around and work in once it penetrates through. And it could walk a little bit, but believe it or not, 3 foot in EMT is pretty darn rigid, right? So again, it might vary for you. This is just what we did. And again, I have a little tarp over there, and I lay all my dirt on the tarp. That way I want to preserve all of the soil. I don't want to, I don't want to get it all over there. Mulch bed, if that's what they've got or whatever. So I'm trying to preserve it. Obviously being careful because you don't know what's already down there. Okay, so if you're in an area, you might want to call 811, Miss Utility, get them to mark something. It's free. Just give them a call. So anyway, when I would do that, and remember, again, if it's landscape type of lighting, then you don't have to go real deep, 6 inches or so. And really, you're just going to be going in that gravel or that portion underneath the sidewalk to get from point A to point B and doing it that way. And I'm going to leave the EMT in there anyway, so that's some protection anyway. So here's what I would do. So the one end is crushed like a chisel. I'd put that in just underneath the slab, and then in the trench, keeping it horizontal, then I would take my hammer. Now, I never used a big sledgehammer. I was able to do this with like a 3 pound or 5 pound or whatever it was, 4 pound sledgehammer. That's all it really ever took. And so I'm sitting there making sure that we're keeping this EMT flat, and then I'm going to be banging the end of it with my sledgehammer. Now, it's only 3 feet, right? And so it shouldn't be all that much of an issue to get it through that, okay? And I never had an issue with only 3 foot to get through that because it should have already been cleared away kind of before they put the gravel and did everything. So it shouldn't be that difficult. Now, that worked for me. And once I had it driven through, I would cut the ends off of the EMT on each side to get me some clean ends on it. And of course, I was anal. I would get the little bushings that fit on the end, but I think more often than not, I'd probably put a connector on there with a bushing on it anyway. It's going to stay there. I didn't want to risk it cutting anything. So again, you can always go overboard, and I would go overboard in order to protect cables or whatever I was putting through there. All right. Anyway, so that's it, and that's how I'd get through. Now, on the rare occasion that didn't work, and that worked probably 99.9% of the time. There was occasion where it just seemed like it was really difficult to get through. And one of the things that I did was took a auger bit. I think it was a 72-inch auger bit. And I ran an auger bit through it. And then I pulled that out. And then I banged my EMT. And it kind of broke up everything. And of course, it's going to tear the crap out of your auger bit. But who cares? This is what you're using it for. And that kind of broke up stuff. And it allowed my EMT to go easier. Also, there is another way to do it on this small scale, is that you can take a piece of 1/2-inch PVC, and to be honest with you, I'd recommend Schedule 80, but a Schedule 40 would probably work. I would put a fitting on the end, and the fittings you can buy, one end of it is a fitting that you glue on, and the other end of it is what would screw onto a garden hose, and you can get these at any Home Depot, Lowe's, or whatnot. So basically, we're turning that 3/4 into a water jet, right? So you're going to have to make sure the adapter at the end goes from 3/4 down to the size it would screw onto a garden hose, all right? And you put that in there, and so when you hook that to the garden hose, the water coming out the end, you will slowly push that and let it sit. Take your time. You're not in a hurry. And as it starts eroding away, the water coming through the end will push the gravel, will push the rock out of the way, will push the dirt out of the way, and slowly. Now, you can kind of do it back and forth in a sawing motion as you're trying to push it through and help it through. And that can get through some stubborn soil as well. Now, you might think, well, wouldn't be beating it through with the EMT work better? Well, in one occasion, it didn't. But the hydraulic method did work better. Okay, so that is one way to do it, and that doesn't take a whole lot, right, in order to do that. In fact, we had I think it was a piece of 3/4 PVC that already had the end on it, and we would put it through, but we would, after it was all done, we would actually pull it out and keep the piece of PVC. Now, for most people, I'd say just leave the PVC in there and cut the ends off of it and don't worry about it. You can make up one of those whenever you need it really quickly. So it's not a big deal. Just keep some PVC glue and a couple of those fittings on your truck, and you can make one of these up in no time. But again, we kind of pre-made it up and had them in case we needed them. And we knew this before we went out to a job that had the sidewalks and things like that. Okay, so that's a hydraulic method, fairly cheap. You only need the 3/4 PVC. You only need one of the fittings, glue one end on, and the other end would receive a garden hose. And then, of course, you need a garden hose, and that's pretty simple and straightforward. That's really the only methods that we ever used for sidewalks. In the early days. So then I got introduced to this product. So I'm going to tell you about a product, because anytime we did a driveway, it was a little more complicated. I remember many times cutting a driveway with the blade, a saw, and literally cutting a groove in there and trying to get it down. But, I hated the thought of cutting anybody's driveway. And sometimes we had concrete driveways that actually had expansion joints in it that actually went all the way down through the concrete, and we could use those for things like the landscape lighting and the dog fences, but it wasn't as conducive for electrical because we weren't getting the depth that we needed to get. So I know of a couple times we've had to cut the driveway back in the day before I got this tool. And I will say that the tool was in Virginia. It was successful most of the time. I would say, I think almost every time we used it, it was probably 100% successful, because I didn't do anything more than, say, a 20-foot span or 2-car garage. And we used rigid metal conduit for it. So it really wouldn't move a lot, and it was a process. So I'm going to tell you what I used. So if you're interested, they've been around for like 45 years. When I got a hold of them, or got one of them, I think it was a secondhand kit. Is if you go to a website, and I'm going to tell you a website, and again, I don't make anything from this. I'm not an affiliate of them. I'm not sponsored by them. I'm just telling you. There's a product that's at www.borit.com. It's Borit, or they might say Borite. I'm not sure. But borit.com. And if you get there, you'll see on the page that you come to, you'll see, I'll just kind of go there myself. If you go to the page, you will see that they've been around since 1959. You'll see a little video there that's pretty crude video, but again, it hammers home the point. And you'll go down where you'll see our collection. And under our collection, you want to click the underground boring kit. You click on that and you'll see a bunch of options. Okay. Well, not a bunch. You'll see a Borit 561 standard kit. You'll see a Borit 562 complete kit, and you'll see a Borit 560 basic kit. I think what we had was the standard kit because it had multiple sizes in it, and we ended up ordering 1.25 inch auger or end bit. But for most applications, if you're a landscape person, or you're just trying to get a 1/2 inch or half trade size or 3/4 trade size through underneath a sidewalk or driveway, then you really only need the basic kit. So it's like $179.95. I know I paid more than that. So anyway, the basic kit comes with the system. And what's interesting about it is that it works with rigid pipe. And so you'll get you some rigid pipe. Now, again, I used to have it already in 6-foot length with couplings because I didn't want to have long pipe. I wanted to be able to modularize the pipe together and add another one as I go and as I need it. But you could use it with a 10-foot stick, and it's fine. But again, I had a separate one for sidewalks and a separate one for driveways in order to try to get through the driveway. And then, of course, mine were done in 6-foot intervals. And the interesting thing about it is you're going to use 3/4 rigid, so it's rigid. You just go buy you the rigid. You can reuse it. And you get your couplings. And what you've got here is a bit that goes onto the end, okay, of the actual rigid conduit, and with a coupling. And then, of course, you've got this device that screws into the end of the rigid, the other end, and a garden hose hooks onto it, and you control it. It actually brings it in. And then you put a standard 1/2 inch drill on the other end. So it is an auger bit on the end that's doing the cutting, but it's also spraying the water And it's allowing you to get both the hydro method and as well as the augering method in order to get underneath sidewalks or driveways. Now, again, the old school way of a sidewalk was pretty easy. But for this price, you can have a complete kit that doesn't matter whether you're encountering a driveway. And all you have to do, if you're doing sidewalks, just keep you a short piece of rigid, and utilize it that way and be able to do it. You can get it cut, you can get it threaded. If you don't own a rigid pipe threader, then go to any large electrical contractor, cut your pieces, go to them. They'll probably have no problem threading it for you. Okay, so you don't have to go buy a threader, that type of thing. Anyway, the standard kit you can get with a 1.5 bit or a 2-inch bit, and it doesn't change the size. So I think I actually had the standard because I believe I ended up having to buy an extra bit in order, because I only needed 1.5 inches. So I think I said 1.25 inches, but it's 1.5 inches and then 2 inches. Now remember, you're doing this with a 3/4. Okay. So what happens is you're actually, if you're going to use, the bits, and you're going to use a drill that's a 1/2 inch chuck, and you're going to use 3/4 galvanized pipe. Or you could use black steel pipe, whatever. And again, you can buy those in various lengths. I think, in fact, the black steel pipe, you can buy at Supply House in 6 foot, 8 foot lengths, not just 10 foot. So, I mean, you can get them at whatever heights that you can modulize this thing and put it together. And again, the beautiful thing about it is that it not only pumps the water through the conduit, but it also turns the conduit. So it turns the bit on the end that sprays the water out the end that's going to move the earth and allow it to go through. And again, you can modulize this to use it for just a sidewalk, but you can also use it for a driveway and be able to get down. Just remember that when it comes to something like this, you're going to make sure that your trench that you're going to be using is long enough to make sure that the pieces that you're putting on can be stay horizontal. At least in the start. Now, that was the reason why I used pieces instead of like a 10-foot stick. That's why I had 6-foot pieces and used couplings, simply because I wanted to be able to not have such a big trench to do this, right? And so it made it so much easier. Now, am I going to tell you this is perfect for everything? No. If you have really extremely bedrock soil, then this might not work for you. If you're going under a driveway and you can keep it in the gravel part, that usually they put down a substrate of gravel, then it should work for you fine. But again, it may, depending on where you're at. But again, if you're looking at under $200 for the kit, and of course you got to buy your rigid and whatnot, couplings and all. But if you look at it, this is a cost-effective way to do it that might get rid of a headache. Now, when going under sidewalks, this is probably... again, I might use the EMT method and bang it through as a quick method. But if I'm having trouble with that, then I can go right to the truck, grab this bad boy, get the garden hose, hook it up to it, use my 6-foot piece of rigid, put the end on it, hook it up, hook my drill up onto it, and I can bore this thing underneath and be done in no time. Because I can guarantee you're not going to run into too much issues under a sidewalk. So you have options. And again, at the end of the day, we're just trying to get the job done. So hopefully that answers your question. That's what and when I got that kit, it made the sidewalk part a lot easier. Although I'm not going to lie, every now and then when I looked at the soil based on how I was digging it and how easy it was to dig, then I would just go with an EMT, crush the end of it and jam it through. Way before, on sidewalks anyway, way before I started digging out any hoses or anything like that and trying to do water and thinking about PVC and a hydraulic method. Now, I believe it or not, my first go-to was the EMT, crushing the end, put it in there, and trying to hammer it through. Usually, if you get it in the gravel, you can go fine. Again, following the laws and the rules and regulations in your area, making sure you understand your depth of cover and all that stuff, that's your responsibility. It's not my responsibility. It's your responsibility. I'm just trying to answer the question on what I would use to get from point A to point B when it came to underneath a sidewalk. And again, the recommendation for the Borit or Borite or whatever they want to call it at www.borit.com. Again, inexpensive. Even if you were trying to run trade size 2 or even trade size 3, they have bits for that as well. It's amazing what the water and the pressure and how that works and will do in the application. But at the end of the day, watch their video. It's kind of a crude video. They haven't updated it. Obviously, it looks like it's the same video from 1959, to be honest with you. But the same concept still works. So hopefully that answered your question. There's a simple way to do it, a more complex way to do it. You can have a hydro boring method with 3/4 PVC and a glued end on it with the hose and sawing motion back and forth underneath it. That might work for you. But there is different options for you. And this kit is just inexpensive. It does use water, but it also uses a drill with the rotating head. That seems to me like that was always the best answer for this, and it worked great for us. And rigid metal conduit, again, I used to keep 6-foot pieces with couplings, and they were easy to get at your supply house, and that wasn't an issue, and I could replace them easily, and I didn't have to worry about chucking around a 10-foot stick of rigid to do this. And usually, you can buy these shorter lengths of the black steel pipe because it's utilized for many things in small sections. So you can usually buy that in 6-foot and other types of things. So it's a little easier for you to put together a boring kit, if you will, than trying to get a longer piece of rigid and cutting it and having it threaded with somebody. So different things to look for. Those are my recommendations. So check it out. If you have any other questions, or if you've ever used the Borite or Borit or whatever they call it machine, feel free to leave a comment down in the comments and let us know how it worked for you. Or if you have other tips and methods on how you got under driveways or you got under sidewalks, leave them there as well so other people can learn from you, all you skilled folks out there. So till next time, folks, stay safe, God bless, and hopefully you got something out of today's episode here at Ask Paul.